Parshas Korach, and it's Haftorah. The reason I'm dealing with the Haftorah as well, there's a very interesting link that I think you're going to find very fascinating between the two. We're going to say in the beginning just the obvious links, but there's deeper links that we're going to get to by the end of this year today. And also, I know the women I'm speaking to have nothing to do with machlokas, so I didn't want to get on that too long because, everyone knows, Korach is machlokas. I didn't want to deal with that in great detail because I don't think that that's so relevant, whereas there's other things that are much more relevant from this week's Parsha. Okay, so first of all, this. All right, let's talk a little bit about the Torah first, and we'll get back to the Parsha and tie them together beautifully, hopefully. The Torah this week is very interesting. It talks about how Shmuel decides to renew King Shaul's kingdom. King Shaul was very humble. David HaMelech called him Mashiach Hashem, even though he had either some people say a crazy moment that he thought David was after him, or that in any case he thought he had the right, that he was rebelling against the kingdom. In any case, King Shaul was a very holy man, and David, as I said, called him Mashiach Hashem. After all, he was meant to be the one to wipe out Amalek. But when he was coronated by Shmuel to be the next Jewish king, he was awkward about the whole thing. He was reticent. He didn't want to accept that position upon himself. So what he did was he kind of stood back, didn't kind of make a big deal about it. And then there was opposition as well, as always. The king of Ammon was, they had to make some kind of peace treaty with them. They refused. I'm just really making this in short. And it starts this week's Parsha that he had won over the Melech of Ammon. And after he won that battle, King Shaul brought him to Gilgal, which is where the, so to speak, Mishkan was at that time. Not so to speak, it was a Mishkan, but it wasn't the real Mishkan until David HaMelech. And they had a whole public gathering for King Shaul, and they made sacrifices. They were all united. And right then and there, Shmuel HaNavi gives a speech. He says, this is, by the way, in Sefer Shmuel, Yud Beis plus the Gimel, that's for you, Bina. It says, Es shor mila kachti, whose ox did I take? The chamor mila kachti, whose donkey have I ever taken? Vesma ashakti, vesmi ratzosi. And who did I steal from? And who did I, push coerce into buying from me? Miyad mila kachti kofer, and from who to take extra money when it wasn't legitimate. And everyone got up and they said their witness that you have, Shmuel HaNavi, have never taken anything from anyone. And everyone was all united, and they brought second connection with this and Parshas Korach. We are told that, you must know this, of course, that Shmuel HaNavi was a descendant of Korach. He was one of Korach's descendants. And Moshe Rabbeinu says a similar speech. I did not write it down, but it's in Zayin Tezvav, if you want me to read it to you. We're told, Moshe Rabbeinu says in the speaks Parsha, after the whole rebellion of Korach, he says, Lo chamor echad behem nasasi. I never took anybody's donkey. Lo hareosi es echad behem. And I never harmed another Jew. Both of them said that. By the way, contrary to what people think about being a great Jew, people think, who are the tzaddikim, the people that are most machmer, the people that are most strict about things. Rav Moshe Feinstein, Zechrano Livracha, said he never in his life felt that he ever on purpose harmed another Jew, ever. To his mind, since he was of age, he never harmed another Jew. So that's what he felt was what brought him to what he was. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, by the way, said what he felt the reason he lived a long life was because he never told a lie. So we find that with all this, behind everything are good mitos, good character traits. That's the main element of a Jew, and that's what we have to focus on. Now, so the reason why people were begging for a king during the time of Shmuel, Shmuel's sons, they thought that Shmuel's sons, they didn't like them or something, they didn't want them to be serving after Shmuel passed away, and they were hoping for a king. Shmuel's trying to dissuade them from being a king, from taking upon themselves a king. He said, Hashem hu malkachem, God is your king, you don't need another king. That was his speech. Interestingly enough, that echoes Parshas Korach, where Korach comes to Moshe and says, Lama tisnasu alam Hashem. Why are you raising yourself above the Jewish people? Why do they need a leader? Interesting echo between the two of them, and we're going to go into what that is here. Now, in both cases, Torah and the Parsha, what they have in common is the leaders stress that they have no personal gain from being a Jewish leader. Contrary to our world leaders today, where it's all about personal gain, a Jewish king, we've stressed this many times before, they live for others. There was a term once a long time ago in English called being a public servant. And we're supposed to personify it in the Jewish world. A Jewish servant, a Jewish king doesn't live for himself. He lives for Klal Yisrael. Now, in both cases, both leaders were rejected. Shmuel HaNavi's children were rejected. And the leader that Shmuel, he rejected really any king altogether, but they wanted it. And both of the two leaders, Moshe Rabbeinu and Shmuel, to show them that the people were wrong in what they were doing. In the case of Moshe, that Korach shouldn't lead, Moshe made a miracle. They took a staff of all these staffs together, and the staff of Aaron sprouted almonds, and flowers. And it was like a cut off dead branch, whereas all the others did not produce anything. The staff belonged to Aaron and Cohen. Also, Moshe Rabbeinu did another thing with the frying pans. They all took 250 members of Korach's rebellion, took frying pans, and they died. They were trying to do the Ketores, and it didn't work for them. In the time of Shmuel HaNavi in Israel, in the summer, it never rains. Unbelievable, never rains. But Shmuel HaNavi promised them they would have pouring rain on the day after they accept Shaul as king, and they all are witness the fact that he didn't take anything. It says Rav David Feinstein Shlita should be gesund stark. David Ben Simon needs refuah shlema. He says that all the people were united behind both Shaul and by Moshe Rabbeinu by the end of the Parsha and by the end of the Haftorah. So that are the similarities between our Parsha and the Haftorah, and that's a little bit of a summary of the Haftorah. But now we have our 4 questions that will come up with some amazing answers and some great things to think about. The first question, which is always asked, and let's get some spins on it. How could Korach, who was one of the people chosen to carry the Aron, the Ark of God, Aron Hashem, he carried it in the desert, like you weren't just a regular person there. And it says, Tzadik Katamar Yifrach. A tzaddik is going to sprout like a date palm. If you take the last letters of tzaddik and then tzaddik Yifrach Sofe Tevos. Tzaddik is a kuf, Katamar is a resh, Yifrach is a ches, that spells Korach. Korach was a tzaddik. Pikei Chaya, he was an intellectual, a genius. Also we find, it says that he had Ruach HaKodesh, he had divine inspiration. He knew he was told by Hashem that he was ultimately going to have a descendant that was going to be equivalent to Moshe and Aaron. It says in Tehillim, Moshe Aaron Kod Bekoanav. Moshe and Aaron were his servants that served him. Ushmuel Bekore Shemo, and Shmuel, who called his name, it means equivalent to Moshe Aaron. Karim el Hashem, Bahu Yaneim. They call out to Hashem and he answers them. So that pasuk in Tehillim is telling us that Shmuel was equal in his generation. He was the equivalent of Moshe and Aaron. That's how holy of a man Shmuel HaNavi was. And who was his Alta Zeta? His Alta Zeta was Korach. So he saw that Korach descended from him. So he said, look, I can't be all that bad. I've got an equal right here, and I've got a point. The Arizal says that ultimately when Mashiach will come, Korach will serve as the Kohen Gadol. Now, I don't know how that's going to work considering he's a Levi, but that's what the Arizal says. So what is that makes our question even stronger. He goes down, gets the earth swallows him and his followers up. Where was he mistaken? Second question. So that's what did Korach do wrong? Second question. In Bamidbar Tezayin Chavches, the Moshe Rabbeinu gives when he's finally testing them with the frying pans like Hashem told him to. Moshe Rabbeinu says, "Bezos tedu." Now you're all gonna know, Ki Hashem shalachani. God sent me. I was told to pick somebody other than Korach. Kilo mi libi, because it's not from my heart. Korach was chosen. Elitzaphan, forgot to mention this for people that don't know. The whole thing of Korach and the Machlokas, I really should go back to this. Some people don't know anything about the Parsha. So let's just start with one little point here. The reason why we make a whole big deal of Korach is Korach was a direct relative of Moshe Rabbeinu. I don't have time to get into how, but he was very close relative. Moshe first becomes God's anointed one at Har Sinai and giving the Torah. Aaron, his brother, becomes the head Kohen according to the words of Hashem. And then it's time to choose leaders. So there were 3 Leviim, Gershon, Gahas, and Merari, three brothers who had tribes, within the tribe of Levi, if you want to call it that. Gahas was the most highest one, which was the ones that they carried all the ornaments from the tabernacle. And they did also more prestigious tasks. So Korach was from that family. And then when they had to choose the leader of that group, every group, you need leaders in every group so everybody can gather together and you have someone to organize everything. So the leader chosen was a man named Elitzaphan ben Uziel. And Elitzaphan was more distant of a relative than Korach. And Korach said, look, this is 3 strikes in a row. Elitzaphan is closer related to Moshe than I am. And boy, 3 times he happens to pick family members, and I am the next in line. I'm the next of kin that should be chosen as the leader. So this is what caused the whole rebellion. Okay, so we have that. So that's the basis of the whole idea of Korach. So how could Korach have gone against Moshe and had made a whole rebellion, took 250 men with him, and decided that he is going to uproot Moshe Rabbeinu. He was there at Har Sinai. He was one of the Leviim that screamed, Mila Shem Elai, and all of a sudden he's resorting to a whole rebellion, a whole uprising. So we know that on one, he just said that he felt that it wasn't right, that the next of kin was not chosen. The one that was the closest in line to be the head of Gahas was not chosen, which was him, and instead Elitzaphan was chosen. So Rav Nosson Bachvogel asked question number 2, and that question is, question number 1, we said, how could he do it? Question number 2, Nosson Bachvogel asked the question, after Matan Torah, how did, now you'll know it's not my heart that made me choose it. How could Korach have imagined that Moshe chose anybody after Matan Torah? Everybody saw who great Moshe was. Hashem let him say the rest of the 10 commandments. How could he be fooled like that? So that's just extending question 1. The idea is how could he was so great. The second thing is how could after he witnessed Aaron being chosen by Hashem, how could he have challenged that? Now Moshe Rabbeinu tried to minimize and even went to Dasan and Avira. He went to Korach. He went out of his tent. It was not his fault. This whole argument that was bubbling. Moshe tried to keep the peace. And he could have just stayed on his little distance, but he didn't. He approached them and tried to make peace, which is amazing. It shows us, even when it's somebody else's fault, it's so he tried to minimize focus, and he tells them Amr Asher. He says says Rashi, B'nai Levi. Like, look what you are. You're B'nai Levi. It's wonderful. Like, what do you want? Kahuna also. What do you want? So this Rav Levi, Rav Bishar says in the Gemara, Rav Lachem, because you said the word Rav Lachem, Bisru. I'm sorry, Amar Rav Levi, Barav Biser. Rav Levi Barav said, Rav Levi said, because you use the word Rav, it's a lot for you, or it's too much for you, which is, I feel, a very nice way of speaking. It's too much for you. You have so much to begin with. You're telling a child you have so much. Because he told them you have so much, Hashem told Moshe later on, Rav Lacha, you have so much that you gave the Torah to Klal Yisrael, you can't enter Eretz Yisrael. What was wrong with that statement, for goodness sakes, that Moshe Rabbeinu, and he said it so nicely, that isn't that a good way for a person to think? A person says, I have so much already, like, why should I want more? And last one question is the whole, this week's Parsha really speaks about greatness of women. We hear Korach's wife was the one that egged him on to the whole argument. Korach's wife told him, you're going to go for this all the time. You're going with Moshe Rabbeinu, and you're just so important, and you've got to go schlep things. You're schlepping them in the Aron and schlepping, and Moshe Rabbeinu is the big leader here. And who are you? She egged him on. We find another person this week's Parsha, On ben Peles, was a person who was, intending to join the rebellion. But what happened was, On's wife said to him, come on, On. She said, listen to me, she said. In any case, you are not the leader. You're a follower. She said, if you follow Moshe and Aaron, then you're going to follow them in any case. If you follow Korach, you're going to follow them in any case. Why be part of a rebellion when you stand to lose? Just stay. Don't do anything. Just stay back. He said, but I promised them I would join their rebellion. So she said, I'll take care of it. Just get into bed. So she told him, go to sleep. She did something very dramatic. She stood by the doorway and took off her techel, which is like, who would ever think of doing something in even Mea Shara in Borough Park, whatever. Yet she was the heroine of the Parsha, because no man in the Dor Midbar. He was caught. A rebellion they'll cause, but they won't see a woman without her hair covered. She stood by the door. They saw her, they ran away. They ran away, and she saved her husband from the fate that befell Korach and his followers. Now, that's very wonderful, but it's, what was her great advice? She just told them, no matter what, it's like logical advice. If you follow Moshe, you'll follow him afterwards. If you follow Korach, you'll follow him afterwards. So why get started up? What was the great thing? There's a deeper message there. Let's follow it. Okay, so to answer these 4 questions, let's get more into it. The whole machlokas here is not so simple, by the way. It says in Pirkei Avos, in Perek Hey, it says that the machlokas of Korach and his followers was not for the sake of heaven. It says, what machlokas was l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven? The machlokas, the argument between Hillel and Shammai. There are many arguments between Hillel and Shammai. There were many arguments between many great rabbis for good purposes, to try to keep the Torah the way they saw fit, try to preserve the Masorah, the tradition of the Torah. Which machlokas is not for the sake of heaven? That's the machlokas of Korach. It seems to be, say, many of the people, like for Justin Bachvogel and some other people that I read, I think Sitzachai mentions too, if not for that, here's something a lot of people have not heard before. Really, Korach did have a legitimate argument. Think about it. There's an idea here. He's saying, first of all, there is an argument of, of the whole thing of your family. Like, how do you know this is legitimate? How do we know you're not being self-centered right now? Also, there's the argument of, do Jewish people need a king? That's exactly what was echoed by his great-grandson, Shmuel. Do Jewish people need a leader? Aren't we all supposed to be serving Hashem? What turned it into such a horrible event is his own personal biases, which we all know about, his jealousy and other things. Other than that, it would have been just a nice, legitimate argument, and he would have been answered properly. He could have discussed it. He could have gotten through for it. There's things he could have done, but blew it up so much was his own personal agenda. That's what got him into trouble. Now, let's just get into some of these questions. Let's answer the last question first. Okay, Rav Nosson Wachvogel says something outstanding. He says, one thing that we all have to know in our approach to Yiddishkeit. We talk about the sin of the spies, last week's Parsha. We talk about the sin of the golden calf. All these things started when people do not think. When they come in a group, in a crowd like that, and they don't think, mob psychology, people lose it. I don't know if I ever told you this. Many years ago, I had a kid I felt really needed it. I took a kid to a hockey game, my one and only hockey game that I ever went to my whole life, and I hope I never have to go to another one. I am not a fan of anything like this, but I felt this child needed it way back, very many years ago. Any case, when somebody scored a goal or when somebody hit somebody over the head, the whole crowd rose to its feet. And I found myself doing the same, and I didn't even know what I was doing, because when there's a mob psychology, there's a frenzy, everybody's screaming around you. Before you know it, you're doing the same thing, There's some teenagers that do that without a mob. They just have to see their friends doing it and they do it. But we have that within us. We have all teenagers within us, even though we've hopefully outgrown most of it. What happens is, we peer pressure, we all succumb. Owen's wife, the great thing about her was that she withstood peer pressure, and she said something. When you feel too excited about something and you're unsure as to what you're about to do is right or wrong, shei v'al taseh adif, which means sit and stop right now. Don't pursue it. If you feel your emotions are leading you and you're not sure you're making a right decision, don't go there. That's what it means. Even things that seem unclear because it seems innocent, afterwards you see the real proof of what happens. Says Rav Nosson Wachvogel, our two matriarchs, Rachel and Leah. Rachel epitomized modesty, it said. What was the modesty? So Chazal tell us her modesty was that she gave the secrets over to Leah about what to say to Yaakov so he'll know it's the right girl when he gets married to her. She gave her the secret code words that she's supposed to tell him after they got married. And she gave it to Leah. How is that tznius? That sounds like kindness, doesn't sound like tznius. So it says Rav Nosson, a lot of people don't know this, but he said the tznius was that Rachel never revealed to anyone afterwards. She never told anyone that she had given it to Leah. She never told Yaakov. In fact, for many years, until Leah started having many children, Yaakov thought that he was tricked by a combination of forces, Leah and her father, Lavan. He never knew that Rachel had done such a wonderful act. Because tznius does not just mean dress. Tznius means knowing when to put on the brakes, when not to speak. It's astounding to never tell anybody. Victor Miller always says that once a day, a person should strive to have something they did that nobody knows about, to keep it quiet. Like even if you have to teach your children, some things, you want them to learn from you. There's got to be things even your children don't know. There's got to be things that no one knows, because then, first of all, you're doing it for the right reason. And that's a question of, you're not doing it for public acclaim. You're not doing it so people should all think you're the greatest thing on 2 feet. That's the idea. She never revealed to him. Can you imagine? So here we have an idea that what Owen ben Pellas's wife that did was so remarkable is that she resisted peer pressure. She put on the brakes and she said, no, now don't do anything. There's a time that when you feel you're too worked up, that's when a person should It's not a time to accomplish anything, not in child raising for sure. You're not going to say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing. We have to calm down before we make clear-cut decisions. We have to think things over. It's a story that he brings down in Gemara Menachos, Kuftes. There were two sons of Shimon and Tzaddik. One was called Shimi, the oldest, and the younger one was called Chanyo. Shimon and Tzaddik, was definitely a Tzaddik. And when he passed, and he was also Kohen Gadol. When he passed away, he told Chanyo that he should become the next Kohen Gadol. Chanyo, though, felt bad. He said, I'm the younger son. I'm 2.5 years younger than my oldest brother, Shimi. He says, I'll pass the huna to my brother. I'll give it over. I'll be mavater. I'll give to my brother. But he couldn't hold back. After a while, it got to him. He got jealous. He started feeling that, I'm not there. I wish I was there. So what did he do? It's unbelievable how people have midos. You could be the most, kind, and you think you did this wonderful act of kindness, and afterwards you regret it. He regretted it. So what did he do? He was the more educated of the two. He told his brother to dress a certain way that was not appropriate for the Kohen Gadol. Not that there was some of the begadim mixed up that weren't proper. The Kohanim all got angry at him because he wasn't doing it right. And Shimi said, it wasn't and they were all angry at him. And he said, no, it wasn't me. My brother told me to dress this way. They all got angry at Chanyo. They said he ran. They were chasing him up to Alexandria in Egypt. And he built a place called Beis Chanyo there. Can you imagine that a person can have you're possessed by, in his case, jealousy, even though he's the one that was mavater. Look how long sometimes you think you're good, but it sometimes can't last. Good, being very generous or kind. Sometimes it doesn't last for a long time, or any good meter for that matter. We have to always be on guard, like the tightrope walker. We don't know. At any given time, we could just fall all the way back down. Terrible. So for this reason, we have to be on guard, says Rav Nassim Bachvogel. On's wife says the breaks, there's a time. It's not just to do how many mitzvahs you can do in your lifetime, but sometimes there's restraint. That's a good thing for us to pause. That's a good reason why we have the Parshas Korach. One major lesson that we're learning today, and that erases question number 4, is that why, what did Om Ben Pelas's do that every Jewish woman should do? That's a time to restrain the husband. It says a woman can build her house, like it's the whole atmosphere by sometimes mentioning, this would be good or this would not be good or whatever. We hopefully could keep things going in the house. But of course, nobody likes to be given mussar or being nagged so much. But in our own way, you say a word once or twice, and you can do the right thing. Nassim Bachvogel mentions that many years before he became the mashgiach of Lakewood, he was the mashgiach of the Rav Aaron Cutler, such a humble man. He even, during his time, he even passed away in Rav Aaron Cutler's yahrzeit because he was so humble and didn't want to take center stage. But in any case, Rav Nassim Bachvogel, many years earlier, there was some kind of controversial book that somebody found in the yeshiva that he was in White Plains, New York. And somebody asked him, Nassim, what do you think about this book? And he said, I don't know. I don't want to say anything about it. I have no thoughts. Because he felt, who am I in this place? I'm not going to take a stand. I'm not going to get into controversy. There was a big controversy raging about that. He felt the smartest thing was not to get into controversy. They told this over to Rav Aaron Cutler, and Rav Aaron Cutler said, this man will ultimately be a mashgiach in the yeshiva because he knows when not to speak. He knows when to keep quiet. That's his claim to fame. So that's lesson number 1. Know when not to speak, when to hold back, put on the brakes, especially when there's emotions raging. Along these lines is the whole impatience of Korach. We find Chet HaEgel, like we were saying before, the golden calf and the spies, it all came from people impulsive. That's when people don't think. That's when we can get somewhere. Rabbi Lowy once said something in a shir, and it stuck with me, and every time I remember to employ it, it's fine. Just to take a pause before every bracha of Shmona Esrei, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, to think, I'm about to say this bracha. Whenever I have employed this method, I actually say that bracha with much more kavanah. pausing really gets us thinking, and especially with tefillah when we have to think, and especially when we are about to do something, we're like in a rush, or we have just done something that we're still grinding our heads about. In both cases, we need a pause button. So just to pause or in benching between brachas. You know, what I try to tell myself when I'm benching, again, I'm not saying I do it enough or too often, but what's helped me is, you know, to just say, first of all, this is only going to take a few minutes, so I might as well do the best I can do. Another thing to pause before benching is to think the first bracha was made up by Moshe Rabbeinu. We're now saying Moshe Rabbeinu's words. Second paragraph, we're saying Yeshua's words. Third paragraph, David. Fourth paragraph, Shlomo. And the fifth paragraph, some of the Gedolei Tanaim. So we're saying their words, you know. These are the holy words to guide us how to talk to Hashem, to thank Him for our meal. So thinking really is, and that's, a Jew has got to think. If we don't think, we're just like an animal with a head on top, you know, and that this is something that every single sin of the Jews or sin of anyone came from a lack of thought, just being impulsive and impatient. Rav Pam mentions in Chumash, many arguments come because people being impatient. If you could have waited, like he says that Shmuel's going to come for me ultimately, fine. If she got Ruach HaKodesh and Shmuel's coming for him, why does it have to happen now? He never entertained the thought that several of his sons would do tshuva, and from them would come Shmuel Hanavi. The last minute, several of Korach's sons did tshuva. That he couldn't imagine. Couldn't imagine that there's, you know, we think we have to push the button to make this happen. Be it, you know, getting a job, be it getting a shidduch, be it just push enough buttons and it'll happen. But we always fail. Hashem is going to come into the back door and bring another wave that we didn't even imagine. And all we have to do is just keep plugging away. Like it says in Yirmiyahu, Yud Zayin, Yud Aleph, for Bina, Oseh Osher V'lo B'mishpat. He says if a person amasses wealth, but he pushes to get it, and it's not honest, B'chatzi Yamav Yazvenu, it's going to ultimately leave him. Uva'achriso yeh naval, at the end of his life, he's going to be foolish. Now, Yazvenu can be interpreted certain ways. He says sometimes when a person gains wealth, but it's unjust, because he pushed, and he had to come around and do all kinds of drays and all kinds of things to get money, what ends up happening is maybe the person was meant to get wealthy, but now he's also meant to get punished forever and ever for the sin he committed by doing it the wrong way. If he would have just waited, the money would come his way justly. Why do you have to get it unjustly? You're going to get, it's b'chatzi yamav yazvenu. If it wasn't supposed to be yours, you're going to lose it. If it was meant to be yours, you'll keep it. But at the end, you're going to regret what you did. I know a story, several stories along this line, but it's a story of somebody I know in town. This person was in real estate, commercial real estate. And he was taking a course. He hadn't quite yet finished his course. He didn't have a license yet. And someone offered him a very lucrative deal. And he said, I don't have a license yet. So somebody in the deal, somebody he knew, wasn't from, so just to that credit, said to him, don't worry, put it on my name, and I'll give it to you afterwards. You just need someone with a license to put it on their name. And he did it honestly. He did all the work. He did everything. At the very end, this person looked at him and said, sorry, it's all in my name. It's mine. He was so broken. He said the next day, went to davening. He said, why did Hashem do this to me? Why did he do this to me? So a friend of his at the Minyan comforted him and he said, you look terrible. What's the matter? And he said, this is what happened to me. I worked my head off, and because I was like a few weeks short of my license, what happened was somebody just took it from under my feet and took the whole deal. His friend told him, you know what? It was Bashert, this other person should be wealthy. But the choice is, how should he be wealthy? Should he be wealthy in an honest way or in a dishonest way? And unfortunately, that money was meant to be his. But unfortunately, he's also going to be punished for being dishonest. The same thing here with Korach. If Shmuel Navi was going to become him and he's equal to Moshe, you have to do it this way. You have to come across this way to have to get it. It's not gonna get you anyways. Impatience never gets us anywhere. Or too much ishtadlus, if to go crazy with it, we have to realize we do what we can. Lo alecha hamlacha likbor. We do what we can. The lo ben charim. We still have to put in our efforts, and Hashem is going to carry the day and will help us out. And this is what we're supposed to do, and sometimes put on those breaks, time to think, time to pause, and that's the beginning of all sin, is when we fail to do so. Another thing, says Rav Chanoch Hanach Lebowitz, Zachron Levracha, he says, Korach never imagined that his sons would do tshuva. Never. Can't imagine a person could change his background. He didn't have enough of a realization of the greatness of man. You realize how every move you make can be so fantastic, can really reap rewards, then maybe he wouldn't feel like he has to push so much. You realize that a person can change at any given time. He didn't think of that possibility that people can change. In this week's parsha, we see something phenomenal. Moshe Rabbeinu has to daven to Hashem, al teifen al minchasam. Don't answer their prayers. When they're going to all come to you with the ketoras in the frying pans, they're all going to come, 250 men, or so to speak, bringing a korban, bringing a sacrifice before you. They were false. They were wrong. They were fighting against Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe had to daven, don't listen to them. Because even if you're wicked, Hashem listens to your tefillah. Every little move we make, the greatness of man, we don't realize how great a human being is, everything we do. Moshe Rabbeinu, because he made a slight approach to Dasan and Aviram and Korach's tent, 3 of his sons repented and owned Ben Pelas. 4 people ended up a person. They see the greatness just of that's Moshe Rabbeinu, you could say, but in any case, small things, we don't know how we're influencing another person. One thing we do, a little thing we do, it could be a hello, it could be anything. We don't know any move we make, the great ramifications of that deal. We don't know how our tefillah today, how our benching today, how our after bracha today could make things in Shemayim. We're ignoring the greatness of man and the greatness of Hashem's commandments. And Korach failed to recognize that. That was one of the things he should have been thinking before he incited people against Moshe Rabbeinu. Another idea is brought to you by Rav Shimon Schwab, Zachron Levracha. Brilliant, deep idea. It's really from his Rav Yisrael Salanter, but he expands upon it. It says like this. This idea of how Korach could have fallen so far. So we said because he was impatient, because he didn't put the brakes on, because he didn't realize the greatness of man inherent in every person, inherent in himself, inherent in his sons. To understand this idea of how he could have fallen, there's 2 chazals we have to understand. They're very popular things that have been said many times. We're going to hear his explanation right now. First chazal in Gemara Sukkah says that when Mashiach will come, the Yetzer Hara is going to be slaughtered, so to speak. It's been slaughtered. It means that people have such an awareness of Hashem that a lot of things that we were worried about and thinking about and entertaining in our minds will be gone. We'll all be so hyper aware of Hashem. There'll be much different type of Yetzer Hara at that time. There will be a Yetzer Hara, but it won't be the same. Tzadikim nidmeh lahem kahar. Tzaddikim are going to witness this Yetzer Hara, and they're going to say, this Yetzer Hara that we've been fighting with all our lives was like a mountain. Rishayim nidmeh lahem kechut ha'sa'ara. And Rishayim, it's going to seem to them like a hair. Like a hair. It's going to like that. That was their Yetzer Hara. How do we understand it? Tzaddikim are going to cry and they're going to say, the tzaddikim are going to cry and they're going to say, how could we have conquered such a mountain? And the Rishonim are going to cry and they're going to say, how could we have not conquered the little hair? So that's going to be a prelude to what we're going to understand about Korach. Another chazal, it says, whoever is greater than his friend, kol hagadol bechavero yitzro gadol amenu. Whoever is greater than his friend has a bigger Yetzer Hara. Now, to understand these two chazals, and we'll understand the deep idea that Rabbi Yisrael Salanter brings, that Rav Shimon Schwab expands upon. And he said there are two kinds of Yetzer Haras. One is the Yetzer Hara chitzoni. There's a Yetzer Hara that's external, and there's a Yetzer Hara pnimi, and there's an internal Yetzer Hara. What does that mean? It means the following. So Schwab explains about it. He says like this: the lower people, if a person is on a lower level, he has what's called a Yetzer Hara chitzoni. He has an external Yetzer Hara. And a person that is higher has more and more of an internal Yetzer Hara. That's what Rav Yisrael Salanter says. Now, Rav Shimon Schwab explains. He says like this: an external Yetzer Hara means that a person is fighting with himself just over commandments, just over like, should I keep Shabbat? Should I keep kosher? That's his Yetzer Hara. You know, should I keep this law? Should I keep that law? Tzaddik is on a more refined level. A tzaddik's level is not, there's no question, he's conquered that territory already. He's beyond, and like we're all within a parameter. Let's say, you know, some people are just rabbanans that they're like problem with, or, you know, Lashon Hara, of course, is harder than a lot of other halachas because it's constant versus, you know, kosher is like once in a while. But there's a Yetzer Hara, an internal Yetzer Hara is harder to conquer. Rav Shimon Schwab remarks that it says somewhere, where does he bring it down? The Vilna Gaon, that says that many people that are totally non-believers have very good natures, very good nature, because they're just still fighting. The whole fight is, are you going to believe in, if you believe in God, are you going to put your money where your mouth is? Are you going to, you know, you believe in God, so why aren't you, God gave you a handbook, a manual. You don't believe God gave you a manual to keep the Torah? You don't believe you have things to do with your life? So why aren't you doing it? Why aren't you conquering? Well, why don't you want to do, you can't believe God gave us the mission? You think God just said, drop down people, I'll see you in 75, 85, 95, 120 years. And then when you come back, you know, we'll see if you're a good person. Why would God just, there's got to be lessons. There's got to be a lesson. And that's what we believe the Torah is. It tells us what we're here in the world for. That's our manual, what we're supposed to be doing in this world. But that's just the beginning. That's the Chut HaSara. It's a manual. You open the manual, you know, there's the do's and the don'ts. And it's hard enough. And I don't know. I think I'm just on the first Yetzer Hara Chitzonis. I'm still struggling with that. The Yetzer Hara Pnimis means you're doing all the right things. You're doing it. You're tzaddik. You're doing everything right. But your thing is much more refined. Was I thinking of Hashem when I did it? Was I thinking of, I did L'Shem Shemayim? Did I have the right kavana when I said a bracha? Did I have kavana in every single word? Shlomo Zalman Auerbach one day said, he came home in a good mood. His wife said, why? He said, I davened all 3 Shmona Esrei today with total kavana. How many of us can say that? You know, that now, if we see people not keeping Torah, that doesn't mean we should feel superior, because we've got our own, everybody at their own level has their own Yetzer Hara they're working on. You're busy looking at him or her, what they didn't do. We, at that moment, we're not looking at what we have to do. And ours is more of the internal thing. The internal thing. Are we littering? You know, not that anybody, I think, listening to this would be littering, but there are people somewhere that are a little bit more lax with that, with their children. You know, by the way, I just have to mention that, I don't remember when this was it last summer? In Muncie, they had a whole campaign. One of the ice cream manufacturers made a campaign where he got all the local kids, every kid that would bring 3 shopping bags full of litter from Lake, what's the name of that lake? Suzanne Lake in Muncie, would bring 3 bags of litter, is going to get an ice cream bar. And they got every single Frum kid to clean up the whole Suzanne Lake. Now, Halavai, we should have it done everywhere. You know, sometimes people, they think they're a child, you know, there's more important chinuch. You know, there's also something, more something a little, you know, I'm not saying it isn't, but some people are so important on keeping things neat and clean and worrying about environment. And meanwhile, they're not keeping the commandments. What about God? Didn't God command you anything? So it's a balancing act we always have to do. Because of that is what Rav Shimon Schwab says, is that was with Korach. We talk about Korach, his Yetzer Hara was refined. It wasn't a Yetzer Hara of doing actual sins. It was already a Yetzer Hara of motives. That's already, and the midos really direct our whole life. We don't realize how much we do because of midos. How much we do because of peer pressure, because what will people think, what will our parents think, what will our friends think. So much is motivated by that. And we have to have pure motives, and that's what Korach was missing. So even a great person always has to purify their motives. It's something lifelong job that we have to do. So we'll never be bored, even in our old age. We always have to be working on our midos. Nassim Bachlogal expands on this a little bit more. Why did Moshe think that, why did Korach think that Moshe had a bias in choosing Aaron? So I'm just going to preface it with Kol HaPosel B'Mumo Posel. That's my thought, and I think I saw it in the portion way back when. Korach himself had a bias, so he sees it in Moshe, You see in other people, but Korach's sin really was very similar to all the other parshas we're talking about. Like we talked 2 weeks ago about the Misonanim, the complainers, and even the Meraglim. It was the whole idea of, I want a certain position. I want it my way. I want to serve Hashem my way. And this is not the way it was meant to be. That was his problem. He wanted to be a Kohen, He didn't feel, says Rav Nassim Bachlogal, he didn't feel, that Moshe was such a, after seeing him give the Torah, it's not like he was thinking, Moshe, you're such a, you're a man that's so selfish. He thought that Moshe may have a tiny subconscious bias, and that he's going to daven a little bit more for Aaron to be selected as the Kohen Gadol. That's what he thought, that Moshe, and Hashem, of course, listens to Moshe because he's so superior to everyone else, and Hashem grants him his wish. That's all he thought, that Moshe had a little bit of a thing. That was his whole rebellion. He didn't think Moshe was this horrible person, but that he did something underhanded. But Moshe answers him, lomely be, that you could say in your heart, I know my heart is pure. That's a very hard thing for a person to say. I don't know if a person can say that very easily, we have to really check ourselves at our generation. I don't think it's necessarily so simple that everything we do is so pure. That we know that everything that we're doing in this world is super pure. It's not necessarily true. Now, Moshe answered him, I am a shliach Hashem, and I was just choosing Aaron from my shlichus, from my message, being a messenger. I have to read you these beautiful words from Rabbeinu Yonah that Rav Nassim Bachlogal brings down. And this is what Rabbeinu Yonah says in Shari Tshuva. Umi, shechananu Hashem yisbarach deah. And whoever is blessed with wisdom, yashiv el libo, he should tell himself, ki Hashem yisbarach shalcho ba'olam hazeh, that God sent him to this world, lishmor mishmarto, to keep his position solid. Wherever he's supposed to do is mishmaris, wherever he's mishmor, the place he is put on, to keep it well, whatever his purpose is. V'saraso, v'chukosav, v'mitzvosav, and his Torah and the commandments he doesn't understand, and the commandments he does understand. Lo yivkach einav zulaso, laso shlichuso, and he shouldn't put his eyes elsewhere when he's supposed to do his service. He shouldn't say, I wish I was this guy with that body and with that this and with that. Ulaketza yamim, at the end of days, imasash shlichuso be'emunah, and at the end of days, if he does his service with good faith, lo yivkach yeshu uva barina, he will come back with joy. V'simchas olam al rosho, and he'll have the joy of eternity on his head. Ke'eved asher shalcho hamelech la'ever hayam, like a servant that was sent on the other side of the sea by his master. She'ein einav b'libo zulasi el davar shlichuso, all his heart and his eyes is, what am I here for? I've got a job. My master sent me here for a job. That's all I'm thinking about. Ad shuvu el adonav, until he returns to his master. And that's what Shlomo Melech said, Lios b'Hashem nitachacha lo diacha keshet imrei emes lashif im amarim emes lashochecha. So he's saying that person should know that his main purpose in life is to not look right or left. He's here for a purpose, besides to keep the Torah, obviously, but he's here to be a shliach. Now, what's the difference besides keeping the Torah of being a shliach? So he explains, the way to explain it, he says, David HaMelech, when he was confronted with Goliath, he met up with him, and King Saul, Shaul Melech, said to him, who are you? You're untrained. You're here with 5 stones. You're going to kill this mighty giant who's armed to the teeth and is, a skilled warrior. David HaMelech says, Hashem brought the lion and the bear, and I see that I'm the one Hashem wants me to serve him. And Goliath is leering at him and saying to him, am I a dog? You think? And he starts cursing God's name. And he was saying, naturally speaking, you're untrained. You can't fight me. But David said, I'm a shliach Hashem. That's what he said to Goliath. And when I'm a servant, it doesn't depend on my strength. It depends on Hashem guiding me. So I can be, if you're on that madrega, that you're just a pure shliach Hashem, then you can fight even Goliath with an ace, because you believe, because it says, hello, kol ha-giborim ka'ayin lefanecha. All the giborim, all the warriors compared to Hashem are nothing. So if I'm just Hashem's messenger and I have no self-motive here, then everything, So he says, Ani ba'alecha b'shem Hashem. I'm coming just with the name of God, and he succeeded. Same thing happened wrong with Meraglim. You were sent by Hashem. Why are you thinking of your own agenda? It's too much. It's too this. It's too that. This will happen. That will happen. Why aren't you just doing your mission? That's what you're here for. Kalev did his mission. That's why he went as a shliach, and that's why he was successful. Now, Korach didn't understand. He had an agenda. He didn't understand. He thought that people have biases. A person that's an Adam HaShalim, a perfect person, which we're supposed to strive for, is not just to keep the commandments. We're supposed to say, Hashem, you sent me to this world. I have to do your mission, to do what you want. Now, here's a little secret. If we don't do our mission, God will punish us, and the mission will ultimately be done by someone else, or by through our punishment, people will learn from us to do the right thing. But really, we're here to perform a mission. That's here what we're supposed to do. And anytime we lose sight of that mission, we lose sight of the fact that we owe you everything, Hashem. And you're going to give us Olam Haba too. Lahanos Meziva Shechina. We're here to enjoy ourselves. We're here to enjoy this world. We're here to enjoy the next world. You gave us pure pleasure. We're indebted to you. We owe you everything. As soon as we feel this, then we're serving our mission. That's our purpose in this world. Not just to do rotely what we're supposed to do, but even in your head. And that's what Korach was missing. And that's the idea that he should have been thinking about the whole time, that a person has to achieve greatness. And the greatness is we can all be a shliach. Now, almost done. 5 more minutes. Sorry. Now, to tie the Haftorah into the Parsha, they say Shmuel corrected the sin of Korach. They both said, Korach said, Kulam, Kola Eda, Kulam Kedoshim. The whole group of them are all holy. Why should V'socham Hashem, and Hashem is in their midst. Lama Sisnasu. Why should you be the leader? Shmuel said, Hashem Elokechem Malkechem. You don't need a king. You shouldn't choose a king. You don't need a leader. You are supposed to choose only Hashem. There shouldn't be any mechitza between you and Hashem. Hashem should be your direct leader. That's the mission you're serving. And a king sometimes distracts us, even though he's just a messenger of Hashem and he's supposed to remind us of Hashem. That's a lower madrega than to directly accept Hashem. I'm just trying to decide which to say first. That's why I paused 1 second, because we're short on time. Now, I'm just going to deter for one minute and say like this. Rav Shimon Schwab says, what was wrong with Moshe Rabbeinu saying Rav Lachem? It's too much for you, B'nai Levi. So Rav Shimon Schwab says, what he did wrong it wasn't wrong at all. He was telling them, you know what? Being a Kohen is a lot of perks. You work in the base of Mikdash. You wear the special clothing. You're the guys that everybody looks at and admires. Everybody wants to be a Kohen. You get to eat certain korbanos, not that the eating is the main thing, but they're holy things, and you're doing holy work all day. B'nai Levi, you're luckier. What you're doing is just for Hashem. There's no perks, there's no self, there's no motives, there's no biases. You know, that's what he's telling them. You're luckier. You're more l'shem shamayim. You don't have to worry about are by doing it for the right motives or not. Hashem said to Moshe, you don't need Eretz Yisrael. You can go without Eretz Yisrael. Now, of course, Moshe got punished because he spoke to the rock and a bunch of other things. So it wasn't a punishment that he said, Rav Lachem. But because he said, Rav Lachem, Hashem says, you're right, you don't need props. Person has to be the shliach. If we're a shliach, that's the main thing at the end of days. Now, Rav Nassim Bachel tells us that in the time of Shmuel Hanavi, Chazal tell us, Shaul could have just been destroying Amalek, and Mashiach would have come. They wouldn't have needed anything else. They were both going to have Mashiach. And the time Mashiach, says Rav Nassim Bachel, all Jews will be like the Chafetz Chaim. They won't need a leader. It even proves, it says in Psukim in Yechezkel, Lamed Zayin, Chaf Aleph, that even the time of Mashiach, the main thing will be the king over the world, not the king over the Jews. Originally, Mashiach will be the king over the Jews, says Rav Nassim Bachel, but later, the Jews don't need a king. They need Hashem. They need Hashem. We want Mashiach in order to make the world a place where everyone will be closer to Hashem. He'll bring peace on earth. He'll build the base of Mikdash, and he'll destroy Amalek. But really, Hashem Elokechem Malkechem. Really, Hashem is supposed to be our king. Korach thought we already had like a geula. We don't need a leader. But Chet HaEgel, we didn't deserve a leader anymore. Says Nassim Bachel. Every sin we do, the Chazal has a bit of the Chet HaEgel, a bit of the sin of the calf in it. What was the sin of the calf? They were looking for a replacement leader, right? Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't coming. They thought they have the symbol of this golden calf. Most of them did not want to serve idols. They wanted just a symbol to remind them of a leadership. But Hashem said, if there's no leader now, just let me run the show. You don't need somebody in the middle. We have to realize nobody's running our life. Not the coronavirus, not the doctors, not the political leaders, not the anarchy, not the other things. Hashem Elokechem Malkechem. That's what's going to bring us to Mashiach, is once we recognize Hashem is running the show, and really he is flipping the whole world on its head right now to show us we don't know what's going to be tomorrow with anything. How many of you had summer plans, order? So many things have failed because of we don't know what's going to be. It's a great lesson. I hope we take this lesson just like they did for 40 years in the desert. We take this lesson, forget our motives. Just let's be a good shaliach. Let's be the one that we cross over the other side of the sea you gave me, situation you gave me, that I am going to serve you. And that imagine Mashiach will come. It says Mashiach's main purpose is not to lead the Jews. Hashem Elokechem Malkechem. We don't need a leader. We need someone to just lead the world and get the world to behave itself. And eventually all the Jews will be deserving. And we said, like the Arizal said, Korach had the right idea. You don't have to have a leader. He's right. But it got a little bit out of hand because of his personal agenda there, which was so minute because it was a Yetzer Hara Panimi. So just to end up with a small story to illustrate how some great Jewish leaders were so, Rav Shach, the great Rav Shach from the Panovich Yeshiva, the Gadol Hador, when he in his last years, he told his students, I don't want to be buried with the Sfarim that I wrote, which was customary by great authors. They used to say, to Shemaim, I want to show the Sfarim I wrote to you, Hashem. He says, I want to be buried with all the posters that people posted, the bizyonis that I got, the people that mocked me and scorned me and said how terrible I was. Those insults helped me with my agenda to be more l'shem shamayim, to be more of a shliach Hashem, to be more without an agenda. That's what I want to be buried with. So I thank you for listening. We should all try to march on from this to be really towards Mashiach and Yetz Hashem, to be a Shliach Hashem, to be the Eved Neman that Hashem wants us to be, besides just keeping the commandments. And let us work on our Yetzer Hara, the external one, and eventually we should all be Zeicha to work on the internal one. So we should look back and say, how could we conquer such a great mountain? I thank you for listening, and I hope to see you again next week with Mashiach Tzidkenu and Herav Yameinu. Amen.